Well, hello and welcome to the second Ashes Test preview podcast. My name's Ian Ward. I'm here in the UK with Rob Key, Nasser Hussain. Michael Atherton is still out in Australia. And as I say, we're going to look ahead to that Adelaide Test with that pink ball. Before we hear from the lads, let's get a view from inside England's camp. Rob Key spoke a little earlier with Ollie Robinson.
All right then, Ollie, the roadshow has moved down to Adelaide. How is it?
Yeah, it's all right. The lads are still in good spirits. Obviously, we arrived yesterday, got a short flight down from Brisbane. Weather's a bit cooler here, which is quite nice. So it feels a little bit more English, which hopefully will be in our favour.
I thought you bowled really well, actually, in the last Test match. You had no luck as well, and considering you hadn't really had any preparation going into it. But how did you all debrief the first Test match?
We sort of actually parked it a little bit and just said, let's focus on the next one. Stokesy spoke really well after in the change rooms and said, let's just start again almost. We've got 4 matches left. Let's view it as a 4-match series and try and win sort of 2-1 or 3-1, whatever it would be. So we sort of parked that game a little bit and tried to move on very quickly as a group onto this one.
You actually looked as well. I mean, I know nothing about bowling, as you know, but you always think about bowlers needing rhythm and match fitness and time and miles in their legs. You wouldn't have had any of that, yet you look like you found your rhythm pretty quickly. How hard was that to do?
Yeah, it's quite a strange one. I felt like we'd bowled a lot of overs, either indoors or outdoors, but actually didn't have a lot of game time to get sort of the 15 over days in and the 90 overs in the dirt in. So rhythm-wise, I felt good, just didn't have the capacity that we normally would have to go, obviously, a whole day and then back it up again the next day. Suffered with a little bit of cramp on, I think, the second day it was in the evening, and sort of just showed that we hadn't had that game time that normally we would have.
So do you feel then, actually, in a way, that because you've had that one game, you're actually in a better physical condition to be able to go through the next game?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the first day almost of fielding is always the hardest. And I think now we've sort of got past that, and hopefully we're all raring and ready to go for this one.
So come on then, tell us about the pink ball. I'm assuming we've seen you've all been practicing with the pink ball. What is it like? How does it differ from the Kookaburra red ball, apart from the fact, obviously, it's pink?
Yeah, it's. I think the seam's a bit bigger, a bit harder. It seems to nip more and quicker than the red Kookaburra. A few of the lads said it swung more today for them as well. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays. I know in the past, if it's overheads have been sunny, it's not done a lot, and it's actually been quite nice to bat with because it does ping off the bat. So I think for us, it's all about getting that timing right. If we can bat in the sunny conditions, get big score and bowl sort of twice at twilight, it will definitely help us. We're training tomorrow under lights, so it'd be interesting to see how it reacts then.
Do you think it will swing more under lights or nip more? Is it definitely a factor?
The batters talk about, like, with the glaze on the ball sometimes and the lights on the ball, it's harder to actually pick up length, and sort of you get drawn into playing more than you normally would. So I think it definitely sort of deceives batsmen a little bit with the light, and I think it does nip more under the lights as well.
You also, what I've enjoyed, I think, the most about you is it doesn't matter who you're bowling at. You sort of come pretty hard at them, and you like to attack the batsman, as it were. You bowl at your length hard, and you're always letting the batsman know you're in a contest. Is that fair? Is that something you try to do?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's sometimes it's for me, not just the batter. Try and get myself going, get into the battle, maybe settle any nerves that I have, and just get into the game a bit. And I think also it helps the team sometimes as well. Sometimes if we've started a bit flat or we've not started how we would like, if I can get into the opposition and help the team sort of get fired up a bit more, we can use it in that way as well.
Now, I know you're not the captain, so you're not going to necessarily know this, but we're sort of assuming that everyone's pretty much fit now. So you've got Broad, Anderson, people like that back in the mix. Is that the way it looks like from what you see in training?
Yeah, everyone trained today. Everyone looks fully fit. So it'll sort of be a battle for places now between the bowlers for the game, really. Everyone's pulled up well as well. Even that was obviously a tough sort of day in the field for us. Everyone's pulled up well. So hopefully we'll have our full strength side this game and go hard.
Right, well, good to hear from Ollie Robinson. Before we reflect on what he said, particularly interesting about the characteristics of that pink ball. Rob, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think are the big lessons that England can take out of that first test defeat?
Well, it's tough really, because he said in that interview that they've sort of just parked it, where Ben Stokes spoke very well and said, look, it's a long series. We'll see it now as a 4-test match series and try and win all the games that are coming up. And I suppose that's understandable. There's big questions, though, about what they do now. Who do they bring in for their bowlers? And this, I don't think certainly Ollie Robinson's not going to know the answer to it. What do they do with Jack Leach? I read somewhere that Don Best might be in the running now because of all their left-handers and all of that type of stuff. So lessons learned is the fact that the batsman still, someone else needs to stand up instead of Joe Root or with Joe Root. I know Milan played well. So that's whatever they do, whatever makeup of team they go for, it's slightly redundant if the batsmen don't step up.
Make some good points there. We'll come back to some of the points that Rob's made there, but I'd like to specifically talk about Joe Root, the captain, Nasser, before we get on to Joe Root, the batsman, how the other batsmen need to step up. As a captain, when you've had a heavy defeat in the first test, you've got 4 games to go, it's a quick turnaround. What is your role as captain? You've got to speak to the press after the defeat. You've then got to speak to the press ahead of the second game. You try not to give too much away to the press, speak too negatively. Are you also broadcasting a little bit to your team? How difficult a role is it for Joe in the days from the Gabba to the start of that Adelaide test?
I guess the difficulty is to balance learning from your mistakes from the previous test and just parking it in that interview that Rob's just done with Ollie Robinson. It looks like Ben Stokes has stood up and said, right, let's just park that. Let's move on with the rest of the series and win the next game. So it's getting that balance right as a group behind the scenes, try and learn from those mistakes, but also realize you can't do that much about them and move on. The more important thing is the mindset of your team and realizing that there shouldn't be and there can't be any mental baggage and mental scarring, really. I mean, England have now lost 10 of their last 11 test matches in Australia, with the other one being a draw. So what you don't want is that mindset of here we go again. I've been in Adelaide once, actually. I've been there in the dressing room where a batter's come out and gone, why is it always like this against this lot? You can't have that situation. If you go back to 2005, the Ashes winning side, why were they so successful against that? They didn't have much mental baggage, mental scarring. The likes of Peterson came in. They just saw bowlers in the opposition. They didn't see bowlers that kept, defeating them, piling them into the ground. So it's that, that mental sort of, you've got to get on with it. You've got to now take this next game, win this next game, and be positive about this next game. The other thing I would say is don't put all your eggs in the pink ball basket. You've got to try and get across to your team. Yeah, it's the pink ball test. It gives us a chance. But do realise there's going to be other periods in this game where the conditions are going to be very Australian-like, and we better be spot on and adapt to those conditions better than we did in Brisbane.
Ath, what's the view out in Australia then after that heavy defeat for England? Are they completely writing England off? It's a Glenn McGrath 5-0. What are the papers saying? What's the media outlets out there saying? Because they can be pretty brutal.
They can be. I would say it's been relatively tamed so far, relatively. Obviously reasonably critical of England's performance at the Gabba, as we were. It wasn't a good performance. Anybody could see that. But none of the kind of pantomime stuff, if I might call it that you often get in the newspapers here. If you recall Stuart Broad, after the non-walking affair at Trent Bridge, when the Herald's son down in Brisbane refused to name him the Phantom Menace.
Courier Mail.
The medium pace bowler. They wouldn't actually name him in the paper. So there's been kind of none of that pantomime knockabout stuff. Nathan Lyon talked up the old 5-0 today here in one of the papers, the Sydney Morning Herald, doing an interview about his 400th wicket and inevitably asked about, the scoreline, and he gave that, but equally said, he always thinks that, and England have got some good players and a good side. I think people recognise that England have got some champion cricketers in there, and they were uniquely disadvantaged before that first test. With COVID, quarantine, rain, absolutely no preparation before the game. So there is just a little bit of recognition that England must be better for the run in the next few games.
One of the big talking points ahead of this test is obviously selection, who England are going to select, and Nasser, how they are going to select as well. We're not out there, we don't know the conditions, but it is a pink ball test, a different characteristic of cricket ball, as Ollie Robinson has spoken about. Have England been overthinking selection? Is there a danger that they will overthink this one, given that we've got a different cricket ball, etc.? How would you balance the side? What are their big challenges?
I think they have been. It seems harsh to criticise a management team for planning, but I do think they have been over planning. Rob, at the end of the last test, made an excellent point about Ahmedabad. You know, for months before Ahmedabad, the pink ball test in Ahmedabad, they had made their mind up they were going to go in with 3 seamers, 4 seamers with Stokes and play the one spinner and Root. And in fact, Root ended up being, you know, the best bowler, and it spun absolutely square. They didn't look down at the pitch at Ahmedabad and pick the right attack for that pitch. So I think you can over plan. It's the long-term planning and the short-term what's in front of you. So I'm in Chelmsford. How do I know what the Adelaide pitch looks like? But generally, the Adelaide pitch in our era, before pink ball cricket and day-night test cricket, was flat, it was hot, and it spun. You know, so in my opinion, that tells me you should be playing a spinner in Adelaide. The other thing that came out of that interview, Ollie Robinson, and Rob asked him a good question, is this bowling attack now, with overs in their legs, better suited to go into this next game because you've done the hard work? And yet England look like they want to play Anderson and Broad, both who haven't got overs in their legs. And how will that affect them if they lose the toss and they're in the heat, the afternoon heat, and that first day in the field? I would play one out of Anderson and Broad. I think it's a bit of a risk to play both with their injuries over the last year or so. I would play a spinner in Adelaide, which makes probably Wokes vulnerable. So it's a very, very difficult decision. I don't think you should just go for a 5-man seam attack. I think that would be dangerous in Adelaide from what I know of that venue.
Keezy, how do you see it?
Yeah, I agree with that from everything that Nas said there, really. I think the same thing that I did in the last test match. You turn up, you look at the pitch and you think, right, what is the best team to pick to win this test match? Imagine it's the last test match you're ever going to play. You know, what team would you pick for that? The biggest problem, if we're being brutally honest, I reckon, I've been thinking about this over the last few days, the biggest problem with the spinner isn't about whether England play the spinner. It's the fact that you don't feel that they rate Jack Leach, nor do they rate Dom Bess. Because if it wouldn't be an issue, this, if they did, Jack Leach would have played right throughout the summer. You know, if it was back in the day, it was Ashley Giles or Graham Swan or any of the spinners we've had, Phil Tufnell, I don't know, whoever these guys were, where generally the captains, and Nasser would know that, you know, they rated Ashley Giles. So it's like, okay, in extreme circumstances, we're not going to play a spinner because it might be so green. But generally, you had faith in your spinner, and I don't think that's the problem. And what Australia did to Leach with Warner and people like that has just created even more confusion when it comes to that. So that's their big issue, you know, is how do they want to play their spinner if Joe Root doesn't have full faith in him? Now, I'm putting words in or thoughts in his head that I think are there, but it's hard to argue with that on the way they've treated him over the last year.
Also, the way he was treated at the Gabba, Michael. Leach has got to be coming into this test, if he does play, lacking a little bit of confidence and trying to get into the series somehow, some way. Would you want to play him? Would you want a spinner in the balance of your side? And would it be Anderson or Broad for you, or both?
Oh boy. I mean, these are really tough questions. I think there's a number of things that impact on all this, aren't there? The fitness of Stokes is one.
Well, I've just seen a video of him hitting Joe Root on the head.
No, absolutely.
So it looks like he's...
Absolutely. He has said in his newspaper column this morning that he's fit, and that the issue with his left knee at the Gabba is an old injury that flared up, and he's good to go. I listened in on a Zoom. The English written media had a Zoom with Joe Root before England netted, and Joe was asked about Ben Stokes' fitness, or at least he talked about Ben Stokes' fitness, and he was a little bit more circumspect. And from that, I got a sense that they were edging towards 5 seamers, but that was before they netted. And of course, Joe went in to face Ben Stokes and got and had an absolutely torrid time, was hit twice. And, you know, the little images the little clips that Will McPherson has put on his Twitter account, Stokes looks as though he's running in and bowling extremely quickly. So if he is fully fit, then clearly England have a chance to balance that side in a different way. If they only see Stokes as a batsman who's only going to give them a few overs, I suspect they'll go all seam. But if he's not, then that again brings Leach into play. The one thing I would say about Leach is that you cannot, listen, he was given a very tough test match, wasn't he? They absolutely marmalised him. I don't think you can just judge it on that situation, though. This was an England team that were bowled out for 147, second day pitch. There was an extended first session. He throws the ball to Jack Leach for that final half hour. Australia are galloping along at 90 for 1 or something. The perfect scenario to take down Jack Leach. Now, what you have to think as a captain is that, you know, if you bat first again in Adelaide, you're not going to be bowled out for 147. If England keep getting bowled out for 147, they're going to lose no matter who they play. So you have to think that if they get what they should get, 400, 450, and the game goes deep into days 4 and 5, then in a balanced and rounded attack, you might need a spinner. Just one point to add to what Nasser said. When we played there, obviously it was a natural soil pitch. It's now a drop-in pitch, so it has slightly different characteristics. You throw those things into the mix. Generally, in Australia, I like a spinner in the side, a balanced side, because as Nas said, you can get some long, hot days. If there's one place where they might not, it's here under lights in Adelaide. But then you have the situation, which seamers are they going to pick? You know, you talk about, will the seamers from the last game be better placed? What if they've gone into the red zone on the back of no cricket, as Broad did last summer? On the back of no cricket, you play a test match, you go into the red zone. Maybe, I don't know. Broad and Anderson had the advantage of bowling for 4 or 5 days at the Gabba with a pink ball in the net, so they should be better primed for it. Mark Wood, fingers crossed, doesn't play many back-to-back test matches. So lots of really tricky answers to come up with, and it's not straightforward.
I'm a bit worried that I've been thinking exactly like Rob Key in the last couple of days.
That's never a good thing.
Never a good thing.
What do you think about your golf?
What I have been thinking, what should you do as a captain? Should you do what the cricketing sense tells you to do, or cricketing logic tells you to do, or should you do what's best for your team? I mean, you go back to the toss at Brisbane. With cricketing, there was some cricketing logic in what Root did at that toss. Some. If you had the 2010 batting lineup, you'd back your side to get 250 in the first innings and you're well in the game. Here, the cricketing logic says play a spinner, but a lot of people say, well, your strength are your seamers. So why are you playing Leach instead of 1,150 wickets of Broad and Anderson? You know, that sort of battle between, I mean, the West Indies side. They're never going to leave out Joel Garner for a spinner. So I'm not saying that's the situation here. Do you do what's best for your side, or do you do cricketing logic?
Well, I suppose you hope that the two combine. That the cricketing logic that the only thing you, as a captain, you say to yourself when you're standing out there and determining the team that you want to play and what you do at the toss is, how best can we win this game? And of course, it's not always the case that you will follow convention. Clive Lloyd upended convention, didn't he? He went through the era with 4 fast bowlers, didn't play a spinner very much, and they were one of the greatest sides that's ever been. If Michael Holding was on this Zoom now, I can tell you that he would just say, you play Wood, Anderson, Robinson, Broad, Stokes. That would be what Michael Holding would say. And who's to say that is wrong? But I, like you, I try and think of the test match in the round. You know, it's 5 days, or should be 5 days. You want a bit of pace there. You want Mark Wood. You want him to hurry up Steve Smith. But you also hope you've got Australia batting last on a wearing pitch as well. So you want to try and cover all bases if you can. That would be the way that I would look at it in normal conditions, unless you have extreme conditions.
Talk specifically about the ball as well, Keezy. What did you take from what Ollie Robinson said about the characteristics of this pink ball, and indeed what the batsman said to him about the challenges? But it was interesting when he spoke about when the batsmen are under lights and they sort of see a little sort of haze around it, as if they can't, and therefore they can't quite pick up length quite as quickly. For those that have not played with a pink ball, and I certainly haven't, what would you say are its characteristics?
Yeah, I mean, I practiced against the pink ball because that started to come into county cricket right at the end of my career. And they felt there was always, like, under lights, it was like this, it almost had like a trail behind it. So you sort of picked that up. I mean, generally, people, I don't think people actually like playing with it. You speak to batsmen who have played in county cricket, in the pink ball games, they don't enjoy it at all. I think they generally feel that it nips around early and then it goes soft, which is actually more the problem. I think as a batsman, you don't mind so much if it's nipping around, because then you think it might get a bit easier. As long as when it gets easier, it's still hard and you feel you can then clear the fence, or you can then hit a few boundaries or score runs. But what people generally do, they set a ring field and it becomes, you get this sort of attritional cricket where nothing's really happening at all. I mean, the nets at Adelaide, Robinson said there that they've been bowling with it. And this is exactly what happened in Ahmedabad. They all bowled with it in practice in the lead up to that test match and thought it was going everywhere. And they just thought, oh my word, you know, Broad, Anderson, Archer, let's get them all in. We don't need a spinner. This is us. You know, we're coming into it here. And then it spun square, you know, and India just went straight through them with their spinners. And if anything, it skidded on for the spin. So it does make it tricky because it's still a bit of an unknown for them. And those nets to Adelaide, I mean, I remember that trip we went on that. Steve Harmison was like the fastest thing I've ever seen. And I was in the net against the spinners when he broke Ashley Giles's arm, because it was just, you know, you can't take too much from the nets is my point with that. So I just think it's going to be a tough decision. But what Root has said and what Robinson said actually is that a lot of the time you will be in bright sunshine. It will be roasting hot, they think there. And the pitch can be pretty flat at times there. So just plan for that, because that might happen more often than it does under lights. What
tickled you there, Af?
Sorry, one thing just to remember from the first test is England, and I don't know how much this impacts upon selection, but England got fined 100% of their match fee and lost 5 World Test Championship points with a spinner in the team. Might go negative. Might be paying to play if they don't play a spinner at Adelaide.
Right, now, as ever, England lose a test match and we start talking about selection and we focus in on the bowlers, and that's what we've been waffling on for the last 20 minutes or so. It's not to do with the bowlers at the moment, is it? I mean, they've got selection issues, who the personnel are, but the bowlers actually did a decent job. Ollie Robinson in particular, who Rob spoke to earlier, certainly. The problem, surely, is the batting. Now, we all got stats from Benedict the other day. I think it's 700s in the calendar year scored by an England batsman. 6 go to Joe Root. I mean, that is not, you ain't winning test matches, let alone test match series against Australia in Australia, if your batsmen are underperforming to the extent England's are.
Yeah, and we've done half this vodcast talking about the bowling, and we'll probably go, right, we'll play the same batters and we'll make 2 or 3 changes in the bowling.
Exactly. It's Beefy's point all the time.
Which is Beefy's point from all those years ago. So the stats are damning, they really are. I mean, there are mitigating circumstances in the pitches in India. 2 or 3 of them spun square, so it was difficult to get big runs. And obviously the Duke's ball in England, the stats for batting are going to be slightly lower. But with only 2 batters averaging over 30 in a calendar year, and the discrepancy between Root and the rest is remarkable, really. It just shows how great Joe Root has been this calendar year. So, yeah, that 147 all out, as Af just said, doesn't win you many games. You're not going to be, you're not going to want to be an England spinner in this setup if your batsmen keep failing in that first innings. The only way to get back into this series is to get first innings runs. The only time in recent memory that England have won in Australia, 2002, 10-11, was when that batting lineup got massive runs in their first innings. That is the only way. Win the toss in Adelaide, bat when the sun is out, get big runs, and hope you catch them with a pink ball under twilight and you've got the bowling attack. I think I've watched England for a number of years now. I have never been worried about their bowling attack. Sometimes When it's spun, as in India last year, you think our spinners aren't good enough to keep up with various spinners around the world. But England's bowling attack and their seamers have been outstanding for a number of years now, and they've been let down by a batting lineup. And it's about time that batting lineup clicked and got big runs. Australia is a great place to bat. It really is. It is one of the best places to bat in the world. Adelaide is one of the great places to bat. This is the opportunity to go and get big runs.
Well, you can have all the team meetings you want, Keezy, and I'm sure you sat in a few ridiculous ones. We need more first innings runs. I mean, that's been one of Chris Silverwood's mantras straight away when he came into the job. You can sit around a team meeting talking about that until the cows come home. How do they put it right? What have they got to do? What practically do they need to do to support Joe Root?
Well, when I've been thinking about this, I sort of worry that what they will do is that, because we talked about it on the last vodcast we did, and it was in the media everywhere. It's like, they should have left more balls. Milan shouldn't have played at that ball. He should have left it. So then the coaches all sit round and say, right, lads, come on, let's go out there and let's leave, let's be more defensive. Let's go out there and let's look to just, be really tough at the start. Let's really get stuck in. And, Hamid, Burns, just go out there and just get us a start, get through that new ball, do nothing stupid. Don't play any bad shots. And you end up with this horrible negative mindset, which will then just play out in a story we've seen time and time again over the years in Australia, where you get so entrenched. You've got to go out there and you've got to be positive. Now, I don't mean playing shots. I know, everyone misunderstood Trevor Bayliss with that. You've got to go out there and you've got to back yourself that if there's a ball there to hit, you're going to put it away. Yes, you have to be sensible and you have to leave the ball well, but that comes from having a positive mindset. So I worry that England are going to think, as they did against New Zealand, when a couple of them played drives outside the off stump. So don't do that anymore. Be sensible. Don't play any wafty drives. Don't do this. Don't do that. And you end up in this world where we're just going nowhere. You have to counter punch. Look at Head got runs being positive. Butler played well, but being positive. Warner, yes, they left. Him and Labuschagne left brilliantly. It was great to watch. But then they struck Leach at like 10, 15 and over. At the critical point, they took it by being positive. And I hope England don't just go into their shells. Play your way, but first thing is to be positive, and you have to back yourself.
You corrected yourself there, Rob. You changed your sentence there. You went, you're going to have to leave better. No, you're going to have to be defensive. I don't think leaving the ball is being defensive. I think in Australia, with the bounce, with watching the way Labuschagne played, I think the leave is an important part of your armoury. I think you do have to leave on length.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm saying. If what I say, of course you do, but where does that come from? As a mindset, as a team, when do you leave the ball well? When you're playing best. When you're not going out there going, I better not play outside here, I better not do this. And you can get this sort of world you get from coaches and everywhere, where the whole thing is just from, come on, concentrate, don't throw it away, don't get out. Whereas actually, you leave, you do all of these things when you're looking to be positive. England you don't go into your shells. You look at who's done well out in Australia, people like Michael Vaughan. People say Cook, yeah, he left the ball brilliantly. He also cut and pulled you to ribbons at times. You can't get into this entrenched mentality of we just have to fight and dig in. When England won in 2005, their whole plan was to try and smash Shane Warne, the greatest spinner of all time at Edgbaston. When they lost at Lords, Michael Vaughan, I know it's a better team and a better batting lineup, but Michael Vaughan was a genius because he didn't sit there and go, do you know what? We better get stuck in here. We better not lose wickets early against the new ball. He said, go out there and be positive. They got 400 or whatever in a day, and that changed the course of that series. So I'm not saying you don't lead, you play shots. I'm saying have a positive mindset. You have to do that, and that helps your defence.
Michael, how does this England batting lineup put 400 on the board more regularly then?
Well, the one thing you don't do is have team meetings about batting. Batting is an individual game. You find your way to score runs. That is your job as an England batsman, to score runs. And if you don't, you'll be shipped out and somebody else will come in. And I find this this notion that you can sit down as a unit and discuss how you're going to go about things, just ridiculous. Each player will find his own way. Hamid will play differently to Burns, who will play differently to Pope, who will play differently to Stokes and Butler. And you're judged on your results at the end of the day. And the number of runs each of these individuals get will determine whether the team gets a score or not. But it's not a team exercise, batting. It is an individual exercise. And it's your job as a professional batsman to have your game in order, to work out in the conditions how you're going to get runs and work out which bowlers you fancy taking on and where you're going to score. That's it. That's professional batsmanship. And if they don't get any runs, ship them out and get somebody in who will.
You spoke the other day about how nervous you were when you were taking the first ball of an Ashes series, most you've ever been in your career. Rory Burns went through that the other day and it didn't go quite so well. He had a torrid first test, dropping catches. Where do you think his head could possibly be at going into this game?
Well, he strikes me as quite a level-headed guy, Rory Burns, which I think is the key component for an opener. You're going to get some low scores as an opener. That is a given. It's a tough place to bat. You're going to get some low scores. So you cannot get too down on yourself if you have a bad game. You have to stay reasonably level and have confidence in yourself. Now he's got a funny technique, hasn't he? There's a lot of moving parts there, and you would say early on against a bowler like Stark, who pitches it right up and finds some lateral swing movement, that's going to test him. But that is the way he plays. He's had runs before. He's got an Ashes 100 before. He'll obviously have looked after the game at where that front foot was going, because under pressure, when your beans are going and your heart's pounding at 150 clicks a second, it makes you move more. So he'll try and, get that balance right between being keyed up. You need to be keyed up if you're facing somebody of 90 miles an hour, but also not too keyed up where you then start to exaggerate your movements and you get yourself into a bad position. I mean, the second innings was a classic telltale sign of a guy who didn't know where his off stump was, because when that ball hit him on the pad, he said to Hamid, he motioned to Hamid, is that going down? And it was basically going over the top and middle. So if you think about it, he's 3 stumps out of alignment there. So he'll look at that, hopefully not get so far across this time. But the one thing he strikes me as is a pretty unflappable guy.
Now, so on a wider point, I mean, you made some excellent points about mitigation, Duke's cricket ball, pitches in India, etc. But England's batting woes have been an issue that they've been concerned about for a while. And the usual stuff came up in some of the media outlets, certainly on social media. White ball cricket is ruining the test side and it's ruining techniques and people aren't playing well enough, blaming the 100 and all this sort of stuff. Do you have any truck with any of those arguments?
I have that with all around the world, actually. I'd say white ball cricket and the amount of white ball cricket is harming test match batsmanship around the world, with maybe the exception of India. When you watch India and their techniques and their openers, if you watch Rohit this summer with, KL Rahul and the way they played and technically how gifted, and any player they bring in seems technically ready for test match cricket. So I do think it is affecting batting around the world. It must be very, very difficult to have long periods where you're not picking up in the middle of the summer, the time where you want to be out there. Again, going back my era of June, July, August, playing on the outgrounds of Essex and Ilford, Southend, Colchester, Chelmsford, the sun is out. They're the times you're cashing in, and also training the brain to bat long, to getting hundreds, 150s, double hundreds, going through that mental process of when to sit in, when now to kick on, all the stuff that Rob spoke so well about just recently, attack the spinner or defend now. That seems to have disappeared a little bit, because you'll get into a rhythm of batting and then all of a sudden you'll have a block of white ball cricket and you'll hit through the line. Someone on Twitter last summer said, what is more genius, we call like AB de Villiers genius, hitting a white ball. Chris Gale, genius, hitting the white ball that doesn't move straight out the park. For me, genius is what Rohit and Rahul did at the top of the order at England, when the Dukes is moving around and you back to lunch and you see off that new ball. Joe Root, genius, batting the way he did this year in red ball cricket. That is genius. I would like us to appreciate a bit more. And this is where me and Keezy disagree a little bit. It looks like the modern concept is, if in doubt, positive. If in doubt, take the positive angle. For me, genius is being 40 not out at lunch and seeing off the moving ball. You know, doing what Australia did, giving them the first session, and then going hard in the last session and going hard after Leach. So I do think white ball around the world is affecting red ball batting, definitely.
I mean, again, you never understand this because it's like your generation, you can't get your heads around it. Positive doesn't mean playing shots. How many times do I have to say? Every time you ante up against the bowler, you know, you're looking to be positive. You might get no runs in a session, but the next ball you sit there and you go, right, okay, I'm still looking to be positive. That's where good defense comes from. It doesn't come from your day when you're sitting there thinking, picking the bat up, going, oh, you know, I'm just going to bat for my life. You know, if I get out here, I'm going to get, you know, whatever's going to happen to me. Gucci's going to tell me off, and so I'm not going to play a shot. You're just looking to be positive because your brain works better when you're looking to be positive, and then that endeth the lesson. I didn't know what I was going to say there.
It was a great payoff.
Come across incredibly.
Sean Connery in that film.
That's exactly what it was from the Untouchables, wasn't it?
But right, let's move it forward and let's look where, Michael, England could possibly attack Australia. What little things did you see that they can take from the first test where they can go back at Australia? There's no Hazelwood, for one, which is not a positive for Australia, but probably good for England. We're not sure about Warner's fitness. How would you see England going about attacking Australia? Let's flip it round. Yeah,
to look for some positive signs, one, Hazelwood has a very good record in Adelaide in the pink ball games. I think he averages under 20 in pink ball matches. And that's disrupted a seam attack that has been together for a long time. Jai Richardson's a handy replacement. He's very kind of whippy and he's got a bit of zing, kind of skiddier, but he's only played a couple of tests, so he's less experienced and not played for a while, so maybe a few nerves there. Warner, we don't know about. The feeling is here that he'll play, but he may be protecting some bruised ribs. Harris, you'd have to say, is yet to bed down as an opener alongside Warner. The really worrying thing for me was the emergence of Cameron Green as a bowler. I kind of think, you know, in the past, Australia have had 4 gun bowlers, and whoever their all-rounder is somebody who, you know, you might look to score off. Cameron Green looked a serious performer to me in Brisbane, quick and bounce. And if, you know, if his stress fractures have gone away and he's come through those injury problems, he looks a serious cricketer. But, you know, how do you get Australia under pressure? You put them under pressure by, if you bat first, you bat well, you get 450 and then see if they want to come dancing down to Jack Leach and trying to hit him out of the park. It's a different game. Test cricket, when it's 5 days, what often happens, I've used this analogy before in Test cricket, that it's a bit like an arm wrestle. And, you know, you kind of, for 2 or 3 days, it might be a bit like that. And then in the end, somebody gets flattened. And it always seems worse at the end of a Test match because a beaten team is usually beaten quite badly. Not always, but often is. But you can always pinpoint areas in the game where the arm wrestle was still 50-50. So, for example, had England taken their chances, had they not bowled Warner with a no ball, had Burns taken that catch on 48 when Warner nicked a slip, easy catch, then had Root and Milan gone on through that second new ball, you can see a situation, an alternative narrative develop where Australia suddenly find themselves in trouble. So one bad defeat doesn't mean that that's necessarily how it's going to go. but you have to be strong enough, and you have to be resilient enough, and you have to be good enough. And that goes back to the individual. The batting, I'll repeat, is an individual thing. You've got to be good enough to do it. You can't, when you stood there with a bat in your hand, they can't help you. You've got to do it.
Well, you guys touched on this last week. One point of difference, and Michael sort of alluded to it there, between the two sides. Nasser, the Gabba was catching. How often do we talk about England's catching?
Talk about it all the time, really, and it often gets highlighted in Australia because historically they've had a great slip cordon. You go Taylor, Warne, War, Ponting, etc. But they're catching in the deep as well in this game. Hazelwood down at fine leg, two great catches. And it's not just been this tour. Brisbane, funny things happen at Brisbane. I remember Michael Vaughan dropping an absolute dolly back in my tour out there. But generally over the summer, in fact, over the last couple of years, we've put up the table of England's catching and slip catching, and it is down the bottom. And considering their bowling attack, you want to have some good slip fielders. If you've got Broad, Anderson, you've got Robinson, you've got Wood, you've got Wokes, it's going to come your way. I think England this summer, I don't know if they made the excuse, but someone gave a reason for it, that the Duke's ball might be harder to catch. We've done a few where the Duke's ball has even wobbled going through to the slips. I think at the Oval, there were a couple. But you can't use that excuse in Australia with the Kookaburra ball. So I think the catching, pink ball test and you're under twilight and the nicks are going to come and it's swinging, you better catch well, because you don't want to be giving Steve Smith, Marnus Labuschagne, David Warner another chance. Definitely they will cash in.
That's the curious thing about England, because we talked about, Nasser made the point right at the start of this podcast that they've been over planning or planning too much. Under no circumstances, when you're planning for an Ashes, would they have envisaged a slip cordon of Root, Burns and Milan? Probably. And that's the curious thing about England, talking about how they've planned so intricately for this tour. They end up with an opening batting combination that have walked out twice before together, an opening bowling combination that have never opened the bowling in a test match before, a slip cordon of Root, Burns and Milan that you think, you wouldn't necessarily want that to be the case. So it's curious how it has panned out, really.
So the summary of this podcast is that they've neither over-planned nor planned enough. Which one is it?
Well, yes, there's a difference between planning and good planning.
We like to give good, clear consumer advice on this podcast, that is for sure. Before I ask you about how you would balance the side to end this, Michael, just come to you. The last test is going to be at Hobart. First Ashes test for them.
It is, yeah. We've played there and enjoyed our time there. Last time I was in Hobart, I stayed in a hotel where Leonard Cohen was staying, amazingly.
Ooh.
Absolutely vital to this podcast at the Ashes.
Anyone else stay in a nice boutique hotel?
By the time we get there, 4 or 5-0 down, we might want a bit of Leonard Cohen on, just to cheer us up.
Right, Keezy, how are you going to balance the side?
I would just go, let's assume that Stokes is fine. I would pick the spinner. I would pick Jack Leach. And I would actually just go, do you know what? I'd go Broad, Anderson, Robinson would be my side. I'd obviously have batsmen and bowlers if that's what you're waiting for. I mean, on the whole team.
With 3 players.
Well, you want to name the whole team? All right.
Just lost heavily at the Gabba. We're going to go in at 4 against 11. Is that what you're saying?
All right, Burns.
No, don't. Forget it. Come on, Nash. How are you balancing the attack?
I would play Wood because of the pace. You're going to need a bit of pace. I would play one out of Broad and Anderson. Whichever one is physically best, they know that out there. I don't know if Anderson's got a niggle or whatever. They both say they're fully fit. I might play Anderson simply because of the pink ball and the swing. Play one of them. I said right at the start, it'd be a bit of a gamble to play both of them. I know they call it fresh legs, but they've not had any match fitness, which they both need. So I'd play one of them. Wood as a point of difference with the extra place. I would play the spinner, which makes Wokes vulnerable. It does leave you with a slightly longer tail, which is something we've not spoken about. Wokes' batting has been useful. But as we've said on 2 vodcasts now, don't worry about your bowling attack. batters, please get runs. It's Adelaide.
Michael, final thought to you?
I'd balance it the same way as Nass, which is a surefire way of saying it's the wrong thing to do. Because we didn't win too many games in Australia.
Well, let's hope England don't go in with just 4 players, as Rob Key is suggesting, and they go in the full complement of 11, and they can put on a bit of a show at the Adelaide Oval. Thanks for watching and listening.